To solve VLuzzles, you can pause, rewind, and take notes. It's the 7th century BC, and you have a challenging task at hand. You need to figure this out as if your life depends on it, because it does. The king wanted to honor his wife of 16 years and asked the smartest person in the land to create a monument using 16 different pillars. All was going according to plan until yesterday, when the smartest person in the land asked the king if he really wanted to have rings, spheres, and his pets represented in each pillar, considering this wasn't in line with the current pillar trends. The word tacky may have been used. The king didn't take the criticism well, so now you are the current smartest living person in the land. It is up to you to finish the project. All 16 pillars have been created, and 3 of them have already been put into place. The rest will be placed tomorrow according to your instructions. The problem is, the former smartest person in the land didn't leave any plans. Here's what you know. The pillars have 4 features. Half of the pillars have cats on top and half have dogs. Half of the pillars have spheres and half don't. Half of the pillars are smooth, while half are fluted with stripes. Half of the pillars have 2 rings around the centers, and half have just 1. The pillars have these features combined in such a way so that there are 16 completely unique variations. For example, while both of these pillars are fluted and have cats on them, this one has spheres, and this one has only 1 ring. The design the king chose for the monument is to have the pillars arranged in a 4x4 grid where each pillar has exactly 1 thing in common with each adjacent pillar. For example, the pillar on this pedestal would have only 1 thing in common with the pillar behind it, 1 thing in common with the pillar to this side of it, 1 thing in common with the pillar in front of it, and 1 thing in common with the pillar to the other side of it. These 3 pillars would be arranged properly because they each have only 1 thing in common with an adjacent pillar. These 2 pillars have only the dogs in common, and these 2 pillars have only the spheres in common. Unfortunately, these were not the 3 pillars that were placed in yesterday. It was these 3 that were placed in these locations. Now, it's up to you to figure out where the rest of the pillars should go. You arrive at the monument at dawn, hoping to give yourself enough time to figure things out before everyone else gets there. Let's see if you can figure out where each pillar should go before it's too late. Good luck! You can pause, rewind, and take notes. Hint number 1 will be given in 10 seconds. Try replicating the 4x4 grid. Choose a letter or number to represent each characteristic. Then start filling in the boxes with the letters and numbers. These 3 we already know. Listing all the possible combinations will make it easier to keep track of the ones that have already been used. Hint number 2 will be given in 10 seconds. Instead of jumping directly into figuring out the puzzle, let's see if we can analyze how it works and come up with some patterns. We'll switch out the real symbols with these icons to make sure no real answers are given away. Here is a sample combination of icons. Let's temporarily fill in the adjacent squares with the exact opposite icons. Adjacent squares must have only 1 thing in common, so we will switch 1 thing in each surrounding square. Let's start by changing the arrow in this square. Now these 2 adjacent squares have only 1 thing in common. If we were to change the same icon in the next square, we would have 2 squares with the exact same combination, and that is not allowed. If we change more than 1 icon in a square, the 2 adjacent squares would have more than 1 thing in common, which is also not allowed. So the only way to have adjacent squares that follow the rules is to change a different icon in each square. We changed the arrow here, so here we will change the face. Here we will change the check mark. And here we will change the fruit. Now each box has 1 thing in common with the adjacent box and has a unique set of icons. Notice how this creates an interesting pattern. In every group of 4 diagonal squares creating a diamond shape, there will be 3 of one item and 1 of its opposite. Here we have 3 X's and 1 check mark. Here we have 3 bananas and 1 apple, 3 red arrows and 1 green arrow, 3 sad faces and 1 happy face. Also, look at the square in the center of the 4 diagonals. This square will have icons that will match each of the single icons. For example, where there are 3 red arrows and 1 green arrow, the center square will match the single green arrow. Where there are 3 bananas and 1 apple, the center square will match the single apple. Keeping in mind that each adjacent square can have only one thing in common, and remembering the patterns just discussed, can you fill in the entire grid? You can pause and rewind. The answer will be given in 10 seconds. The first step is to recreate the 4x4 monument and assign symbols to each characteristic. Let's add the information we already know and list every possible pillar combination. You can figure out this puzzle by working through the possibilities in each adjacent square one at a time, but it may be easier to follow the patterns shown in hint number 2. Hint number 2 explained that when there are 4 squares in a diamond shape, they will have 3 of one characteristic and 1 of the opposite characteristic. These 3 squares have an X, so this square must have the opposite, an S. We see that there are already 2 P's, so this square must have the third P to make this a single F. We also see 2 D's, so this square must have the third D. There are 2 2's, so this square must have the third 2. Hint number 2 also explained that the center square will have symbols that will match each of the single symbols in the 4 diagonals. For example, there are 3 X's and a single S, so the center square will match the single S. There are 3 P's and a single F, so the center square will have an F. There are 3 D's and a single C, so this will be a C. There are 3 2's and a single 1, so this will be a 1. Hint number 2's pattern can also be looked at in the reverse. When a center square matches a characteristic of one of the 4 diagonals, the rest of the diagonals will have the opposite characteristic. Since these are both 1's, the rest will be 2's. Keeping this in mind, let's imagine that this is now the center square and these are the diagonals. Since these both have C's in them, the other squares must have D's. Adjacent squares can only have one thing in common. So since these 2 squares already have the D in common, the rest of the characteristics can't match and must be the opposite. The same goes for this square, with matching D's. Repeating this logic, let's imagine that this is now the center square and these are in a diamond shape around it. Since these squares both have D's, the others must have C's. Also, since these both have S's, the others must have X's. Because these squares are adjacent and already have an X in common, the rest must be the opposite. There are 3 1's, so this must be a 2. There are already 2 F's, so this must be the third F. The same logic can be repeated until all the squares are filled in. The pillars can be placed in the correct areas and your life will be spared. For now. The king's daughter has a birthday next month. We'll see what monumentous gift he has in mind. Did you get the right answer? Let us know in the comments below, but no spoilers, please. Give us a thumbs up if you had fun. And please subscribe for more VLuzzles.